I think I do want to get started, to honour that we're in the room and we're ready to go. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Cluster to Cluster webinar this morning. And the purpose of this cluster monthly meeting is to support the cluster managers across the island. Sorry, now another admit. Support the cluster managers across the island and to support knowledge sharing, peer-to-peer connections and collaboration. And it is through these connections that we're building a cluster learning community for each other. Firstly, so our programme for today is broken into two sessions. Firstly, we have two clusters presenting Applied IoT and Cyber Ireland. And directly after this, we will have time for questions. We really encourage you to use the web cameras, and if you wish to make a comment or ask a question, please do so using the chat function and put in your name and your organisation. And for the second half of today, we're joined by Crystal Miller from the University of Ulster, who's going to discuss competitiveness and the cluster case study. So I'm going to introduce you to our first two contributors today. Tom Fitzmaurice is the Business Development Manager with the Applied IoT Technology Gateway Cluster. Tom works closely with Irish SMEs and startups to develop collaborative projects with members of the broader Enterprise Ireland Technology Gateway Network. And through the Applied IoT Cluster Gateways, Tom has access to full-time research and engineering teams who are available to assist companies in the development of their new and innovative products and services. Tom also provides information on and assists with the various R&D funding mechanisms available for such collaboration. And prior to joining the Technology Gateway Network in 2016, Tom had spent 25 years in the development and delivery of meteorology-based engineering solutions and training to industry leaders worldwide, including Airbus, GKN Aerospace, BAE Systems, Babcock Marine, Diamond Light Source, European Synchrotron Radiation Facility, Astrium, Daresbury Laboratory, the Boeing Company, NASA, Northrop Grumman, Vestas, McLaren, General Motors, and Chrysler. And that wasn't a test from Tom to me. Our second speaker today is Dr. Owen Byrne. He's a cluster manager at Cyber Ireland, the National Cybersecurity Cluster Organisation. Cyber Ireland was launched in May 2019 and brings together industry, academic, and government to represent the needs of the cybersecurity cluster and address the key challenges for this sector. Owen's previous work has examined regional economic development and industry clusters across a diverse range of sectors from agri-food to ICT in Ireland and internationally, and Owen was part of the D-Link Cluster Research Group in Cork Institute of Technology. Owen completed his PhD in 2016, developing a methodology to understand clusters through the measurement of firms' linkages. And I'll now hand you over to Tom and Owen to get started. If everybody else can go on mute. And Tom, if you want to share your screen.
Will do, yeah.
And if you move into present speaker view, except for Tom. Yeah.
Okay, can everyone see that, folks?
Perfect.
Okay, firstly, I'd like to thank Claudia for the opportunity today to present on the Applied IoT Cluster, which is one of 3 technology gateway clusters across the network of 15 gateways that we have throughout Ireland. So you'll see the 5 at the bottom there: Command, IMAR, Nimbus, TSSG, and WISE are the 5 that make up the Applied IoT Cluster. So as part of the Technology Gateway Network, what we do is we provide engineering and research resources to companies who are looking to develop new products, improve on existing processes, develop new services, and so on, that may not have an internal research and development department available to them. They might have ideas, but don't have the resources or the equipment to take it forward, and that's where we can support them. So we work with a lot of SMEs and startups, and you'll see there on the right, since the inception in 2013, we've created over more than 4,000 projects with 2,500 companies. I guess one thing to point out there also is because it's 4,000 projects and not 4,000 companies, it shows the amount of the amount of companies that come back and do multiple projects with the cluster. As I mentioned at the outset, the network consists of 15 gateways, all based at institutes of technology and technological universities around Ireland. So each of the 15 would be based regionally, but have a certain area of expertise. And what happened back in 2016 was the 5 gateways in the Applied IoT Cluster saw that even though they were getting a lot of projects regionally and locally through their own business development people, there was a lot of companies in Dublin and the Leinster area that weren't aware of what the cluster and the gateway could provide as regards to research and development supports. So the companies that we work with can access either by paying directly to have the support. They can use Enterprise Ireland innovation vouchers or innovation partnerships. I guess one thing to kind of stress here is across the network outside of the cluster even, the gateways do not do, let's say, work that companies are out there doing. So we don't do brochure website development. We don't do anything that doesn't have some element of risk involved. And that's the whole idea of the network, is to provide research and development for companies who have ideas that may or may not work. They're kind of taking a punt. And then that's where the funding mechanisms come in through Enterprise Ireland to kind of de-risk financially to a certain extent the financial burden on a company, because there is that risk involved in the project. The 5 that we have there, you'll see them in the map. So we have Command based in Athlone, Nimbus down in Cork, IMR in Tralee, WISER up in Letterkenny, and the TSSG Gateway, who were based in Waterford Institute of Technology. So again, the business development office in Dublin, which is where I'm based, even though I live in Kerry. So we were talking earlier, I'm probably the luckiest Kerry man that I have a free office in Dublin. So I have cheap rent there, even though I haven't been there since March because of everything that's happened. But still supporting through Dublin, but pretty much nationwide, even though 80% of the projects that I would bring to the cluster would be based in Dublin and kind of the greater Leinster region. With regards to the areas of expertise, one of the reasons that the cluster was brought about was because of the similarities between these 5. They range from software to hardware straight across the spectrum of, let's say, IoT devices, from the sensor development through to networking, communications, data analytics, AR, VR. But one case study in particular would have been a company that were looking to provide a mechanism. It was GrazeBot for automating the grazing for cattle in pastures. And they started with Command, who did the software piece, but didn't have the technologies or the equipment and personnel for the hardware. So they teamed up with the IMR gateway in Tralee, and between the 2 gateways, then they were able to successfully complete the project for the customer. I guess from going across there from Command would be, we'd say, mainly software. IMR would be a mix, but mainly hardware. Nimbus would be, again, a great mix of hardware and software. TSSG would be very heavy on the software side, data analytics, AR, VR, and WISER up in Letterkenny would be more on the sensor side, sensor development and electronics and antenna design. So even though IT and networks would be a huge part of the kind of realm that we're in, we're also across a lot of different areas. So manufacturing companies might have an issue where they have a production line and they want to reduce waste. They want to monitor moving parts and machinery so they can do some preventive maintenance. Transportation companies in this, retail, buildings, a lot of construction projects. So again, it goes across a wide range of areas where the cluster would work with various companies on projects. And I think now I've breezed through that because I think I have 8 minutes. So hopefully that kind of covered it. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to email me. I don't know if Claude has plans to circulate our kind of contact information after this. I know we were on the list at the beginning. So if anyone has any questions on the cluster, please feel free to get in touch, and we'll see if we can be of any help to any participants out there or any companies you might know that have an idea but don't have the resources to maybe take it further. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom. If people can just hold their questions until after Owen's presentation. Thanks, Owen. If you want to stop sharing, that's great. Yep. Brilliant. Thank you. Owen, would you like to share your screen?
Yeah, just getting it up now. 1 second. Can you see that?
It's coming through now, yeah. Perfect.
You can see that there?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, thanks very much, Clodagh. My name's Owen Burnham, Cluster Manager for Cyber Ireland, which is the National Cybersecurity Cluster Organisation. I'm just going to give a short overview of Cyber Ireland, but I think some learnings that might be useful for the other people on the call today is around developing a model for cluster development in Ireland, because we don't really have a standard template for developing and supporting cluster organisations in Ireland. So there might be some interesting learnings from what we've done through the Cyber Ireland model to date. So just a bit on my own background, as Clodagh said, I did my PhD research actually on cluster analysis and trying to understand clusters through the linkages that firms have within a cluster. So whether they be along the value chain, suppliers and customers, with government, research, training, etc. The importance of those linkages and where they actually go. I've worked in the V-Link Research Institute in CIT, where we've done a number of clustering and regional economic development projects, covering areas from cluster analysis to cluster evaluation, initiation and development of clusters, writing cluster strategies, running training and workshops. And we've done quite a bit of work. I suppose we've done some bit in Ireland from an agri-food sector report in the southwest. But mainly a lot of our work has been internationally, because if you look at Europe, they've been supporting clusters for 3 decades now. So there's a huge number of clusters and successful ones that have been supported in some leading regions like France, Spain, Germany, Austria. And that's where we've done most of our work, everything from 7 ICT clusters across Europe to the maritime sector, and then internationally as well in the US, Colombia, and South Africa. So we've kind of seen a broad range of clusters, everything from the emerging and developing ones at the early stages to the ones that are slightly more mature, might have cluster organizations that's up and running, to the kind of best-in-class clusters that have been running for 10 or 20 years and that are used as best practice examples across Europe. And there's a huge amount of learnings that we can take from these best practice examples across Europe that can be applied to supporting and developing clusters in Ireland as well. So Cyber Ireland is the National Cybersecurity Cluster Organisation. It was set up only last year in May, and the aim of it is to represent the cybersecurity sector in Ireland and to address key challenges that the industry had identified. We have a national scope because the vision for Cyber Ireland is to make and to support Ireland in becoming a national or an international cybersecurity location for talent, for innovation, and for cybersecurity solutions. And we can't do that on a regional basis, competing internationally, if we just have the Cork Cyber Cluster, where I'm based down in Cork Institute of Technology, hence why it's a national cluster organisation. And our biggest success to date in the 15 months has been, we've had huge buy-in from industry. So we've over 180 members that are actually signed up to date. About 160 of those are from industry. You can kind of break them down roughly 70 multinationals and 90 indigenous companies, and that are both from the cybersecurity sector, but come from a range of sectors outside of cybersecurity, but they might have large security operations as part of their organization as well. And I think the key thing about Cyber Ireland is we're trying to move away from this model of being an industry association or a networking body to a best practice cluster organization with the goal of enhancing the innovation, the growth and competitiveness of the organizations that are part of the cluster. We have 4 key themes or areas that we support the companies through, so that the foundation of all cluster activities is kind of building the community. So supporting networking activities, promoting the cluster, building trust between the various different members in the organizations, and that allows you to do the other activities around addressing the talent and skills shortage in cybersecurity, supporting collaborative research and development between industry and academia, and then finally supporting business development, so supporting a startup ecosystem and internationalization of SMEs. Looking at the kind of cluster development timeline, so although we only launched it last year, it actually goes back to April of 2017, where there was an industry meeting of about 20 or so cybersecurity companies. that wanted to address the skills shortage. And that got all these companies into a room together, although many of them would be competing with each other internationally and then competing locally for talent. The challenge was big enough that they saw a need to come together to address this. And out of that, there was also other challenges identified around the low level of collaborative research and development, lack of promotion of the industry, a lack of national coordination as well. So all of these challenges, there was a call for some sort of a representative body to address these for industry. So that was kind of the why there was a need for a cluster organization. There was a structural challenge that wasn't being met by industry or by government. And so CIT took the lead in putting in an application to IDA Ireland for seed investment to set up and launch a cluster initiative. So that funding was awarded in November of 2018. And then before launching the cluster, we spent 6 months mapping out what does the cybersecurity sector look like, who are the companies, the academic institutes, the government agencies that could be part of it, and then did quite an intensive stakeholder engagement process where we went out and ran 3 cluster initiation workshops in Cork, Galway and Dublin. There was over 250 people attended those and over 90 companies. So that was a real key part in getting the buy-in from industry, understanding their needs, explaining what a cluster organization is and what its role is, and also importantly, what it's not and what it can't do, and gaining the buy-in from industry through that. So the feedback from those workshops allowed us to develop a cluster strategy with a vision, objectives, cluster activities. We were able to elect a board, and then we launched the cluster in May of last year. Since that, we've been, I suppose, implementing our cluster initiatives across those 4 key areas. And then we recently launched our membership model in June of 2020 to ensure that, I suppose, going forward, that we're not just depending on government funding, but it's also coming in through industry revenue streams as well. And that was quite a challenge, launching revenue model in the middle of COVID-19 and when there's a lot of pressure on companies during this time, and where you can provide kind of the networking and the meetups where you would actually meet with the companies as well. So kind of some of the kind of key takeaways at a high level around what are the kind of necessary ingredients for a cluster model for Ireland. I think the key point is it's about building a cluster, not creating one. All the ingredients of a cybersecurity cluster was there before Cyber Ireland was started. So we weren't building or creating something from scratch. And identifying a sector that has a competitive advantage. So the cybersecurity sector in Ireland, it has a very strong multinational sector, both made up of cybersecurity companies, but also ICT companies with security operations. And the reason they're coming to Ireland is access to talent. There's a worldwide security shortage, and companies are able to get the talent in Ireland, hence why they're coming here. The third part is looking at international sectors where there's an international opportunity as well. So the cybersecurity sector is growing rapidly year on year. It's 12%. We've all seen from the impact of COVID, you know, we're all depending on our digital technologies, our communication platforms more and more. That's going to have an impact on security as well. So there's a large international market opportunity for cybersecurity there. And then it's also critical that you have industry drive. So this has to be run by industry for industry. There's no point in having a top-down initiative where government is trying to create a cluster without the buy-in from industry. And we had that buy-in because they wanted to address specific key challenges for the sector. But it also needs to be supported by the academic institutes who provide the talent and who provide the research and the innovation as well. And then finally, the government agencies. If we want to address these key challenges, government agencies are critical in delivering that as well. So we have IDA Ireland, Enterprise Ireland, and the National Cyber Security Centre on our cluster board as well. And then the final part of it is around having an actual cluster development model or a template that we were able to implement, and having some cluster management expertise as well that we built up over the years of working on European projects, which has really stood to, I think, the development of this cluster organization in this context. So I'd be happy to kind of go into more detail at a later stage on any of the pieces here, or talk to any of the cluster organizations that are on the call around our model and what we've learned from it as well. You're on mute, Clodagh. That's part and parcel of every webinar or meeting these days.
Thanks, Owen, and thanks, Tom. There were two hugely informative, brilliant presentations, and I think we're only scraping the surface of what's there and the discussions we could be having. Does anybody want to put forward questions for Owen or Tom before we move on? I'm sure there are many questions. Does anyone want to unmute there and ask a question? Kevin?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask on the Cyber Ireland side of things, are you connected in with the Northern Ireland market on that?
Yeah, we are, Kevin. Actually, so we work closely with NI Cyber, and Intertrade Ireland actually funded an analysis of the Cyber Island. So it looked at benchmarking the Belfast cybersecurity cluster and the Cork cybersecurity cluster. So interviewing companies in each of those regions, understanding the linkages that they have, the strengths and some of the challenges of both clusters, and then looking for opportunities to, I suppose, support business development, cross-border business development, and we'll hopefully we'll have a business development workshop as well with NI Cyber coming up in the new year as well.
Okay, that's funny. It was just a question that came up yesterday, Clodagh. Do you remember about the cross-border development of clusters? You know, so I was just curious as that was. I know what's happening in the Northern Ireland market. I live in Tyrone, but I'm interested to see that sort of connection. You know, I know the FinTech corridor is happening there, and there's the Northwest happening with LIT and Ulster University and some of the FinTech business up here.
Yeah, and there's a very strong cybersecurity cluster in the north, which is embedded in Queen's and the Cybersecurity Research Centre there, which is a fantastic resource where the UK government has invested in it 10 years ago and are reaping the benefits of it now with FDI investment in the region because of the security research that's ongoing there. And it's actually one of the challenges that we have in Ireland. We don't have a central point for cybersecurity research in Ireland. It's quite fragmented across the country, and it's difficult for industry to engage in, which makes it more difficult to have that collaborative industry academic research that's ongoing as well. So that's one of the challenges that we're trying to address through the cluster.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Owen. Any other questions before we move on? Tom, I have a question for you. It's on the projects. So what are the types of projects? So I know you said you'd about 300. You know, what is industry looking for from the different centres? So an example of maybe two or three different recent projects.
Yeah, so I guess it varies again because it's applied IoT. It's a lot of them are utilizing IoT technologies. So there's one recent one would be a machine, and again, this is just to use sensors to kind of take out. There's a company that wants to develop a machine for hedge cutting, but as we all know, if you see the hedges cutting, and the rural roads, there's a lot of debris, there's a lot of plastic, there's a lot of metal, there's stuff that's been dumped in hedges over time. So they were looking at a way to be able to use sensors to segregate let's say the foliage and the branches and leaves from other essentially rubbish, so that it could be gathered and not strewn back out into the thing. You go from kind of geolocation based projects where people are looking at like delivering messages from local shops based on the person's their air code. So they just type in their air code and up will pop local industries or local companies that are delivering to within that kilometer radius of their home. Again, I'm trying to think of some of the more recent ones. There's like care homes with sensors in them for the elderly, where if they're for sitting down too long, that they're not moving, that they're I suppose in danger of getting bed sores. Or so again, there's like pressure seating that's been developed by Wise Ireland or Kenny, where if the carer sees that the patient hasn't moved for a period of time, they'll go and they'll move them to prevent, you know, the onset of bed sores. So again, it goes across. There's nothing, you know, I suppose because it is sensor driven mainly. And we all know in the last like decade, we've gone from having no sensors to sensors on everything. There's sensors in soil, you know, there's various projects recording like growth and plants and, you know, so from healthcare, transportation, construction, there's a wide variety of, and again, the ones that we work on, there has to be a certain level of innovation about the project. It's not just something that, you know, a company can do or something you can buy off the shelf. It has to be something innovative, and, you know, that's where we kind of, the researchers and engineers that we have based at the gateways can assist.
And just Tom, my own experience of research and engaging, and maybe go back to Owen's point that they're looking to develop a research cyber. How do companies work with, so if you do come up with a soil sensor, and the process of extracting that from the IoT and bringing it to the market, is that more seamless now, or?
Yeah, well, yeah, we wouldn't. We're not involved in the commercialization. Let's say from the technology readiness level, we take an idea from concept to maybe prototype or
Okay.
MVP.
Okay.
It wouldn't be true to commercialization. There are other resources that are available. So
Okay.
I guess the bulk of the projects we take would be from idea or concept through to like a prototype or.
Okay.
Model.
So it's to prototype and see, does that make a difference in the market?
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. Any other questions for Owen or Tom?
Claude, I have kind of one there as well, and I'd be interested, maybe it might be something we could explore kind of through this forum, but kind of what have been some of the challenges of maybe some of the other organizations on this call? Like maybe I was overly optimistic and rosy there in my presentation, but the kind of startup of Cyber Ireland was far from easy. There was plenty of challenges along the way. I think like one of them was a lack of understanding around what is a cluster and a cluster organization when we were even going out and talking to government and academics and the companies at the start. Especially the academics, actually, a lot of them thought this was a cybersecurity research cluster, and that CIT were starting up their own research center, and it was a land grab. Well, so there was a whole education process there that we had to do at the start, and for the companies as well. You know, how is this different to any other networking organization that we're a member of already, that we go to regular meetups? So I think that was a challenge. And then looking at kind of the cluster landscape in Ireland, we don't have kind of an overarching cluster policy or a framework or any kind of national coordination around what is a cluster organization and what's its role in supporting economic development in Ireland. I think that's a challenge because there's not a clear role for what's the role of clusters then in supporting innovation and economic development. And then as well, I suppose you have the challenges around there's many different types of organizations within a cluster. They all have different needs and goals. So how do you align those different needs and goals? And industry are very much focused on the short term. So what can I get out of it now? What's the value of my membership fee right now? Whether a cluster in its kind of philosophy is all about the long term. It's not about creating jobs right now or business value specifically. It's how can we support a sector or a cluster to work better together to address certain challenges or to go after certain opportunities that are going to have benefits 3 or even 5 years or longer down the line, and trying to realize those kind of objectives with different types of funding streams then as well, whether they be short, medium or long term.
Owen, there's about 3 hours in there, and I know there's 1 or 2 other people on the call that'll be delighted to hear those questions. And I suppose it's a lovely segue into Crystal's piece and what we're going to talk about next. And it is something that in the Cluster Centre and the cluster leaders across Ireland, so yourself, John Hobbs, Linda Jameson, Invest in I, Intertrade, and all of us here who are at the forefront of doing what we're trying to do, it's a consistent question and a consistent piece that needs to be addressed. So thanks for asking it. I'm going to hold it there for a time one, and we might come back to it at another one of these sessions. And I'm going to lead into Crystal, which I suppose frames some of part, starts to frame that. As you said, there's an education piece, and what are these clusters and what do we need to do? So Crystal is a senior lecturer in strategy at the University of Ulster, and her areas of expertise are innovation strategy, business models, and competitiveness. And alongside delivering postgraduate and executive training, Crystal also works in a consultancy capacity to help organisations develop and grow. Crystal has published over 20 papers in international journals and is the incoming co-editor of the Irish Management Journal. She also sits on the editorial board of the International Small Business Journal and the Irish Business Journal. And she's managed special issues for high quality journals such as the Journal of Business Research, Journal of Technology Management and Studies in Higher Education. Crystal is a speaker at conferences and events. And Crystal is also a member of the Innovation Caucus, who provides expert knowledge and research to inform policy and is an expert reviewer in the European Commission. Crystal's topic today is competitiveness, Porter's diamond model and clusters. And during the session, we were going to move to breakout groups to discuss the case study, but I don't want to squeeze that in, Crystal. So we might go to your presentation and we'll go to some questions and some discussion around that. Just I'm conscious of time, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no problem. No, I was following the time there, so I was thinking we'll run out of time. But yeah, thanks very much. It's really wonderful to be here. Obviously, it looks like I'm going to cover a lot, but I'm going to condense it all down. A wee bit about myself, Clodagh, give you a bit of a background. So I teach in the area of competitiveness, innovation, and business models, but also do research in that area. Ulster University is one of only 2 universities across the UK who's part of the Harvard Business School Microeconomics of Competitiveness Affiliate Network. So in Ireland, University College Cork is also a member. So each year we come together, usually in December, to talk about all things competitiveness, clusters, and you can see myself there with Michael Porter on the right-hand side, and you can spot me in the middle somewhere. But I want to talk about some of Porter's work, which hopefully some of you might find interesting in relation to your clusters. And really what we're talking about.
Kristen, just before you go ahead, is there a little message on your screen about captions and subtitles? Is that yours?
Oh, yes. I didn't know you could see that.
Perfect.
So really what we're talking about here is the microeconomic competitiveness remit, and that's really my interest. Obviously, we know that the macroeconomic side of things really impacts clusters and competitiveness. So obviously we heard there from Owen and Clodagh was talking about, the political context, the government support, aspects like that that's really missing. But we want to talk really about the micro side now and how the sophistications of a company's strategy, the quality of the business environment, the ecosystem, and really the state of the cluster development can really enhance competitiveness. And I want to, just give you one tool to maybe look at that very briefly, and obviously then open it up for discussion. So Michael Porter, he has lots and lots of tools out there, and he's really a global thought leader in relation to aspects of competitiveness, clusters, and more recently social progress, and how really, in my eyes, clusters really underpins all of that, clusters and collaboration. He is well known for his 5 forces model, but I want to talk about the diamond model. So he basically came up with this diamond model as a way of understanding what makes one nation succeed compared to another nation in regards to international competition. And it was based on 10 years of research over 10 countries. And really it's looking at, why is, for instance, Japan well known for their automotive industry? Why is, Italy known for their leather and their fur? Why is, the Taiwanese known for their laptops and high technology? And really trying to map out how we can understand what makes a country strong. And on the basis of this, we recognize that there's differences in relation to values, culture, but really he identified that national prosperity can be created. It's not inherited. So if we think of, Ireland, north and south, we obviously have lots of natural endowments that, are pluses and minuses, but we can also create our future in regards to our capacity for enhancing industry's ability to innovate and upgrade. So based on his research, he came up with this diamond model whereby he identified 4 different aspects that really feed into a country's competitiveness. As we know, it's far more complex than this, and in fact, there's been more advanced models since then where, you know, people really pull out the role of government as being a separate entity. However, Porter views government as being interwoven into each of these different 4 aspects. I'll just talk you through really briefly. Obviously, I've only got a couple of minutes, so, you know, a couple of minutes on each. So if we start on the left-hand side, the factor conditions. So that's really, you know, what a country is born with versus what you're able to basically develop. So it's your inputs into a country. So your basic factor conditions is things like your natural resources, your climate, your location. And as I said, that can be plus and minus. So, you know, if we use some examples, you know, of a negatives, so Sweden often suffers from, you know, not very much light during parts of the year. Therefore, they had to be very innovative in regards to thinking about their construction and building sector, which led to them being innovative in regards to prefabricated houses. So it's good for countries to know what the pluses and minuses are of their factor conditions. So as I said, the basic ones is your natural endowment, your land mass, your demography, whereas your advanced factor conditions is really what we can develop our prosperity in the future on. So it's things like our communications infrastructure, or sophistication, or labor, it's our research facilities, or technological know-how, and obviously government, and as I'll talk in a minute, clusters can play a key role in that. Then at the top, we have the context for firm strategy and rivalry. So that is obviously our firms within our country, and government plays a key role in determining that context. So, you know, that's bringing in different aspects of the macro environmental competitiveness indicators, such as, you know, tax, you know, the laws, the regulations, the support, the incentives, but then also it's about trying to stimulate firms within our country to be competitive, to be, you know, to want to innovate, to try to better themselves, to have aspects of co-opetition. And obviously, you know, clusters can really do that and really drive the, I suppose, the competitive nature within a country. If we don't have companies that are competitive, then obviously we're not going to want to better ourselves. Companies, you know, don't really, might not have that aspiration in their domestic market, never mind their international markets. Then we have demand conditions, which is really our consumers, and the nature of the home demand is really important. And, you know, I'm not sure if any of you got a chance to have a quick look at the very long case study, but, you know, the demand conditions in a lot of countries that have strong clusters is very high. So if you have consumers who obviously demand very high quality, innovative, you know, goods, services, then again, it's going to drive the companies to have to innovate, to have to collaborate, to better themselves. And as a whole, that will drive up productivity and increase the sophistication of their operations. So having demanding customers in a domestic market is really, really strong for enhancing the competitiveness of a particular country. And then if we think then down at the bottom is the value of related and supporting industries. So that's really the presence or absence within a country of having related supporting industries, such as your suppliers, your universities, you know, government bodies, your wider ecosystem, who all feed in and help each other. You know, so there's lots of examples out there. You know, if we take one of, I suppose, the well-known examples of, you know, MIT University over in the US, and obviously, you know, based on their high quality degrees, which led to high quality IT graduates, which then helped enhance the Silicon Valley cluster, and that then attracted supporting industries to the region, whereby then they had the suppliers, you know, they had then all the, you know, shops, the investors. So that's really what, you know, the premise of a competitive nation has, these related and supporting industries all backing each other up, so that then it can lead to new industries and new clusters that are emerging around one cluster. And, you know, we might have a few, you know, insights in the chat, perhaps, if we've got a few minutes, to talk about the case study, but in the case study, you can see that whenever you have one cluster within a particular region, that attracts related and supporting industries, and then that in itself fuels more clusters within a particular country. So it's that cumulative development within a particular country. So how does Porter's model link to clusters? Well, obviously the last factor condition, the related and supporting industries, is really then from his work in the 1990s dropped out clusters. So he then went on to really focus on the value of collaboration within countries and the importance of clusters. But if we think across any of the diamond models there, or diamond factors there, clusters is embedded in all of it. So if we think of the factor conditions, so we have the advanced and the basic. So the basic factor conditions might determine certain clusters, around ports, within, agricultural clusters, within areas where there's a lot of land mass. And then the advanced factor conditions, we need those in order to develop our clusters. So we need, good infrastructures, we need, good connectivity of airports, we need people to be able to connect to each other, access, good skills from universities in order to fuel and grow our clusters. The firm strategy and rivalry, obviously we need companies that have strong strategy who want to grow, but we also need then the government initiatives and incentives to really help them do that, and obviously then get them to collaborate together in the clusters. The demand conditions of the consumers within a country, obviously, clusters want to target those consumers, and as I said, we want them to be demanding because it's going to, impact us all to better ourselves, whether it is the firms, universities, government organizations. We all need to innovate, and demanding customers help us to do that. And then, as I said, the last point, the related and supporting industries, all of us here, all will probably know better than I about the importance of the supporting industries in order to help your clusters grow. And if we look at any of the case studies of successful clusters that have been around for 10 plus years, you really see the strength in that over time, and that without those related and supporting industries, the clusters are really, I suppose, compounded in regards to their growth. I just wanted to, show a few books here. So obviously there's the Michael Porter books, but the other two books on the right-hand side are ones that I also would use whenever I'm trying to give some initial insights into my students. I teach it on a couple of different degrees. Owen, you're completely correct in that a lot of academics and, even in the north, in Ulster, we're even chatting to, councils, and they don't know what clusters are. They still, there is so much convincing, I think, still to be done. And even in my class, I often have those debates with the students about, what is the benefit of cluster versus collaboration versus networks. And I think that'll be, really important in trying to enhance clusters across Ireland moving forward. I suppose that's my remit. I suppose we did have a question, but obviously, we're going to open it up maybe generally for questions. And for anyone who maybe did read the Dutch Flower case study, this is a case study that I use in class all the time. It's one that the Harvard Business School really pinpoints as being their core case study. So whenever they're teaching it in Harvard Business School, they use that with their students, because learning from a cluster that has 20 years of experience and has really developed over time, we can learn a lot of lessons from that for any region. Obviously every region's unique, we can't necessarily replicate it, but we can definitely draw out success factors. And I do have some slides that Clodagh can share with you all if you are interested in what those success factors were for the Dutch Flower case study, that you can have a look at in your own time. So thank you.
Thanks, Crystal. Thanks a million. So if anyone